Pruning timber crop trees. Often, high-value hardwood species need corrective pruning to get them off on the right foot. Pruning at the right time can really enhance the future timber value in your woodlands. Say hi to Hank and Greg and all the tree friends out there. We're looking in a fairly young walnut stand here, and we're trying to pick out which trees to prune. You don't want to prune every tree in your stand. It's going to be way too time consuming. So you got to pick out the ones that have the best potential for future timber value. So the walnut we're seeing here has some serious defects that I would say don't even bother pruning this at this point. It's got a giant crook in it that's not going to be correctable. And also it's got some limbs that are past the size where you want to make that wound. In general, you want to trim limbs when they're about 1 to 2 inches in diameter. Anything bigger than 2 inches, unless it's correcting for an injury, say some wind injury or something, can leave a fairly large wound, which can be an entry point for disease and decay. Now again, with timber crop trees, think about 16 foot up. That's what you're really aiming for that log where it's going to be harvested. They usually use a 16-foot log at harvest. And honestly, give yourself an extra foot or two just to be safe. All right, so that one's out. This one might be pretty good. What do you think, Hank? I don't know, you're the boss. I thought you were the expert. I don't even know why I'm out here today. All right, now this walnut is fairly straight. It's got a healthy crown. It looks vigorous. I think it has a high potential for good timber value in the future. And the lateral limbs are of a size that we would not create a significantly large wound if we prune them now. You want to leave lateral limbs until they get about 1 inch in diameter, because that's fuel or sugar for the tree's growth. But then you want to make sure you take them off before they get about 2 inches in diameter. That's when the wound you create is going to get a little too big, and that can be an entry point for disease and decay. I'm kind of doing a 16-foot log here. And never remove more than 30% of the canopy. So if you have to come back in future years and cut up to that 16-foot height, that's okay. So I'm going from 16 foot all the way down. All right, Hank, I tend to forget things. I'm going to mark this just to know that I pruned it and to see what my progress is. It's good to walk your woodlands first, ideally with a professional forester, and mark the trees you plan to prune. This will give you an idea of how much time commitment you're getting into. Now this large walnut's probably beyond the point where pruning's going to do any good. That old limb there is producing a defect on the outer part of the log, which is the high dollar part of the log. So that limb should have been removed much earlier. This bur oak right next to it has a ton of epicormic shoots, or those little tiny branches coming out the side of the tree. This is also kind of an indicator that, I might want to skip pruning this tree. That's going to create a lot of pin knots and little small defects in the wood. I would move on to a different tree. And honestly, it's so big at this point, again, those defects are going to be in the outer part of the wood. So this right here is a really neat example of a defect. This is called a cat face, and it's kind of hard to see. This is an old limb that has broken off and has sealed over, and it creates this kind of gnarled inconsistency in the bark there. The grain is also gnarled, thus decreasing its overall timber value. So if we would have caught that limb early and pruned it, we would not have had that cat face. When you're pruning these limbs, especially the larger ones that get up to about 2 inches in diameter, you want to do a 3-point cut. This really prevents the adjacent cambium from tearing and will help with rapid wound closure. When you're doing these cuts, pay close attention to the branch collar and the branch bark ridge. So the branch collar is the swelling at the base where that branch attaches to the main stem, and the branch bark ridge is this ridged area right here in the crotch of the limb and the main stem. Both act to prevent disease and decay entry into the main body of the tree. You definitely don't want to cut into or sever those two areas. When you're doing this 3-point cut, first make one cut on the bottom of the limb, about 1/3 up. Move up the branch a few inches, make the second cut, and you'll see it pops off very nicely. Then, with that weight removed, go back in and just above that branch collar and branch bark ridge, make the final clean cut. Now this is a wound that will heal over quickly, and this tree will have a low potential for getting disease and decay entry in that wound. You want a sip? Hank, I feel like I'm doing all the work here today. No, feel free to grab a tool. No. You're fine. I'll get it. Don't worry. I'll get it. So this walnut here is concerning because it forks well below 8 foot in height. So I don't think pruning is going to do much here. And even if I cut off that limb to the right, you're going to be removing much more than 30% of the canopy. So this one should have been pruned long ago. For now, we'll just have to leave it be. Well, Hank, you've been asking all day why we have to prune. Let me break it down for you. Here's some cookies. Not those kind of cookies. The point of pruning is to prevent large defects or large wounds on the outer portion of the log. That's the high dollar portion of the log. Seen here, we've got very small wounds, almost pin knots, very near the center part of the stem, which is good because we're going to add a lot of high dollar defect-free wood after that point. Now on the flip side here, we've got a large wound that's getting into that high dollar wood space. Now it's not the end of the world because this tree is going to get much, much bigger, but this is an example of why we want to prune early and prune often. Here's another example. We've got a little limb that's getting into the high dollar zone, but this tree is going to get much, much bigger before it's harvested, so this isn't really the end of the world here. That is going to close over and produce high quality wood beyond that point. This is a double leader, as you can see there on the center. There's 2 center points. And here we show a great example of an old limb being an entry point for disease and decay. If that limb is allowed to stay on the tree and rot, disease and decay can enter and create hollow portions of the stem like we see here. Pruning timber crop trees. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it. We'll see you, hopefully, pruning in your woods.